One of the major features in SharePoint is the search capability. As a matter of fact, there are a number of customers that I know that install SharePoint and just use the search capability. With SharePoint 2013, you'll see that there is a focus on increasing both the usefulness of it and the ease of managing the search process. Fast, if you're, again, a SharePoint veteran, is now built into the enterprise search functionality. Previously with SharePoint 2010, when Fast was actually acquired, it was an add-on onto SharePoint, so there were some integration choices you had to make, whether you're going to use the SharePoint native search or Fast. You don't have to worry about that anymore. All of that technology is now native SharePoint. So SharePoint Search is SharePoint Search is SharePoint Search. Now, we have different levels of functionality as normal, but know that you don't have to make different choices for different products. You're mainly working on what levels that you want things to happen in. Search configuration is now found as a peer of the other service applications. This actually isn't a demotion, but this is just a making sure everything's as consistent as possible rather than having search pulled out as a high-level feature, even though it's one of the major features of SharePoint. It's now managed just like the other service applications. This actually helps when you're working with your scripting, with your management processes. You don't have to have something very different for the search configuration as maybe your AD integration or those other items. It's just regular services in SharePoint. Note that the Search Center URL is not installed by default. As we go through some of the demos, you'll see that getting the Search Center URL does take a little bit of effort at this point. That being said, it's in there because as the default install, you get to choose which level of search that you're working on, and Search Center sometimes can be a bit overloading for users that need a lighter level of search capability. So know that that's in there. If you're not seeing it, it's just because it needs a little bit of configuration as you move forward. We'll take a look at the Farm Search service, which, if you're new to SharePoint, is where the entire search service is handled. If you're a SharePoint veteran, you'll remember there was a fairly good amount of configuration in place. With SharePoint 2013, the options are now much simpler. The team has streamlined out the search service and tried to make sure that not only are you only working with what you need to, but that you have a lot more granular control down at the search application level. So a lot of the features you've seen at the search service level have now moved down into the application level, so don't worry if you don't see them at this point. The options remaining are still very powerful. As a matter of fact, they're some of your most critical items. So when we go through with the demo, things such as the proxy definitions, the timeouts, all of those still live at the search service level. That being said, that means that you're looking at those at that level, and you need to be aware of how each of those search applications fits into the search service options. The search service applications are where the bread and butter of search is. You've actually got a lot more comprehensive options in. As we go through the demo, we're going to take a look at each of those options and make sure that you see what you've got capabilities on. Things are actually broken out a lot better now, so you can actually find them a little bit easier. Key items are presented up front. The SharePoint team has made sure that you can actually do a quick at-a-glance understanding of where your search services is and how things are working in there. The supplemental items are now on the left column. You'll see this as you go through all of the central administration. You saw it previously in the other modules that generally you've got a lot of very important information front and center, but you've got deep drill downs on that left column. It's a very nice way of presenting that information. The crawls are key to your search. If you're not crawling the content, then you're not going to be able to index it. You're not going to be able to pull that information into your SharePoint farm. The crawl content sources provide specific details depending upon the crawl type. So as we're going through, we're going to take a look at what happens what options you have when you're crawling an HTTP site versus a file share versus an Exchange public folder. There's a lot of information based around that content. SharePoint also lets you, under the hood, put some additional content sources in there. You're able to do a lot of different details as you work through that for how SharePoint can understand and provide context around that data. The crawl schedules are scoped at the content source level. This is good in that it keeps everything kind of in sync, but it also means that you probably need to look at your content sources a little bit, because if you've got some items that really need a fast search, then you're going to want to make sure that those are as limited as possible, whereas things that may be a bit more static content can be broken out into their own content source for a longer level crawl. And the crawl rules provide detailed inclusion-exclusion options. This also ties back into the schedules. It's one of those things where, depending upon how you want to set up your crawls, you can actually put a crawl schedule or multiple crawl schedules on a content source with different inclusion-exclusion rules to be able to say certain items get updated a lot quicker or certain items are fairly slow. You will still pay a slight penalty for pulling in and acquiring at least the listing of what's going on before it crawls the individual items in that content source, but you don't have to pull, like, for example, if you've got a file share with large video files and you're just interested in the metadata because that tends to change, your indexer may not know all of the details on the actual video files themselves, but there may be an external XML. You could run two different crawl rules, one which is fairly quick, which only includes the XML files for the metadata, and another one that provides longer-term searching that does not do the XML, but actually does the video files and checks to see if any embedded content there can be indexed. So you can actually do some inclusion-exclusion to optimize what's going on with those crawls for the content sources. And you can actually set specific authentication information. By default, SharePoint uses your farm administration account. There are situations where, for different reasons, you may need to set a specific access account for maybe a website that has information that's common. Note that when you put in those specific the authentication information in there, this may break some of the rules SharePoint has on figuring out the ACLs for each of those items. By default, as SharePoint crawls different file shares, different HTTP locations, it can actually find the ACLs for the users that you're looking for. This enables it to use those as rules for search results to be able to say certain users can access this or can't access that, and provide search results filtered by security rights. If you're setting different authentication information, then it is entirely possible that SharePoint Crawler may not be able to pass that information along about who has rights. And if that happens, then just be aware that you may not get those security trimmings on your search results just because SharePoint does not have the information to do that. So that's gathering information. Now we're going to look at the actual queries that users can put through SharePoint. The queries, this is something that's very useful, can be monitored and provide clues as to the user behavior and interest. You can actually see what your users are searching on, what they're actually finding results on, what's going on through there. There's a significant amount of information in there. That being said, now you've got built-in reports that you can actually do your top-level analysis. There's some good information in there about how users are finding information, where their searches are being abandoned, how they're getting their information, where they may get suggestions. There's a lot of analysis that can be done on your search results to make sure that your users are finding exactly what they need, or even more importantly, finding the information that you want to make sure they have when going through those queries. Query rules can provide supplemental control over the results. So you can actually go through and say, this is an authoritative source. There's a suggestion upon this query term that may go over into different information. These results should be different on a query. So you can actually go through and modify what's happening with those queries. This is kind of a bridge between the queries and the results to be able to pull in that information and make it all work correctly. And then the search schema can provide managed content mapping. If you're doing items such as searching on users or searching on groups in your Active Directory, or maybe even organizations, the search schema can actually go through and help you do mapping from some things that are, to be charitable, probably obscure in Active Directory, especially if you've got a very large implementation, over to something that does make sense for your users for doing their queries, and both for viewing the results and understanding what the context of that information is. So you've got the ability to pull that in, provide some information around that, some mapping from kind of our world of IT terminology over into something that the user is going to find useful and valuable. and then the results themselves, which are pretty much all that your users are going to care about it generally. URLs can be set to be promoted or removed. You can actually say items that are in this area are more valuable, or anything that's being crawled over here for these results can be removed. So you can actually be very specific about what information is being returned in your results. This is very valuable as you go through and make different complex queries happen. You can actually have a lot of control over what your users see and put together. Certain content can be set as authoritative. I mentioned this on the queries, but on the results you can come in and say HR on this search term may be vacation. I don't care what the rumors are, what people have been talking about in the different places, what maybe they're setting there, what they want to have for their vacation. On vacation searches, it goes to the HR policy on that. So you can set those pieces up. You can also strip areas out or lower the content and set those up in place. You can actually set up suggestions. If you've done several of the modern search engines today on the internet, you know that as you're typing, the system can be doing look-aheads. SharePoint Search now has this capability. It does require a little bit of setup on your part, a little bit of work, but knowing that you can actually have those suggestions coming in and working with your users, it's going to provide them a bit of that understanding or familiarity on your internal systems that they're used to for general consumer level searches. So now we've actually looked at some of the items on search. Let's get a little practical information and go into the actual search configuration and management on the server. So here we are back at Central Administration, and we're going to look through and see the details on our search services. As I mentioned, the services are actually a peer of all of your other services on the SharePoint farm. So we find it down here. We search on the services on server. We find our SharePoint search server. We're very happy that it started. We can stop it if we chose to. We really don't want to do that. But we just click on the server search and we go into the configuration options so we can actually see all of our details. We start out at the farm search administration. You can see that actually we start with the farm level settings, the proxy server for crawling and federation. So we actually, if your organization has a specific proxy server that they want to go through, normally you can actually let the server itself work directly with its content, but if you needed to, you can have a proxy server set in. Addresses, ports, actually bypass the proxy server for local addresses or set up those addresses that you don't want to go through the proxy. So if you've got a fairly locked down or controlled network that needs various proxies to get through to various subnets, SharePoint's ready for you. You can go in and put all the information in that you need there. You can actually use the proxy settings for federated sites. So if you've got a partner company or if you've got departments that actually have federated networks, you can actually go through there and put those in place. Again, right, there's a lot of authentication items coming into place with federation that SharePoint understands about, and it reaches throughout the system. You can actually have your timeout as you're going through systems. You've got a connection time and acknowledgement time. You can go through and take a look at those and be able to manage what's happening there. You can actually ignore the SSL warnings or not. Basically, if you're wanting to crawl and you know that you may have certificate problems, you can tell it to ignore the SSL certificate name warnings. That being said, that the SSL certificate does not match up with the URL for crawls. If you know that you've got some situations that may happen, maybe legacy organizations or places where the SSL certificate has expired and maybe for various reasons it hasn't been fixed, you can allow the crawl to ignore those. By default, I would not have it ignore, but there are situations where you may run into that, especially if you're crawling maybe some new sites that the SSL certificate hasn't been issued for yet. So those are your top level settings for the farm search. Most of the settings, as you heard, are actually down into the search service application. So let's step down there and take a look at our content. So here we are at the search service application doing search administration. As you can see, again, if you're a veteran of SharePoint, this is laid out a little bit nicer than you've had before. If you're new to SharePoint, you can actually see a lot of your information sitting up right here in the center. We also have down below the fold, we've got the search application topology, and the different databases that we're tied into. As we've got a single server implementation, you can see that everything is kind of sitting on the same server. We've got our index partition 0, we've got our query processing, analytics processing, all that information there. As we go into more complex topologies, as were mentioned in the planning section, you can see that these may be on different servers, or actually may be on multiple other servers, especially if you've got situations where you may have 3 or 4 crawlers searching large amounts of information, petabytes of data to crawl. You may have multiple crawlers working through there. You may have the content processing happening on a different server, the analytics on its own dedicated cluster, all of those kind of things happening. Query processing sometimes is broken off by its own to be able to give your users very fast responses, even though the rest of the system may be working very hard. We actually have our databases that we can know exactly where those are happening, where those servers are at, where you can break those apart at, and where you know what's happening. So we'll go back up to the system status. We know that the administrative status is running. Right now we don't have any crawler background activity. This server is only searching itself, so we don't have any long-running crawls there. The recent crawl rate, not really great, 0.1 items per second, but most of that's because it rolls so quickly through the search items. You can see we only have 2 searchable items, but this is where you can actually see that when you get up into very, very large numbers, you can actually see just what kind of scale the search crawler is actually working with. Recent query rates, no queries per minute, but you can actually see real-time kind of what's going on with your users, how quickly are they doing. You can actually monitor what's happening as they come into work, as they're the different pieces where they're searching for, what's happening there. We got our default content access account, so we can change that. By default, the network service is in there. The contact email address for crawls. This is one of those pieces that often is just left as, I hate to say it, but something like what we see here as admin@contoso.com. That's not a big issue if you're just searching internal content, but if your SharePoint search is starting to go outside your network, you really do need to have this in a filled out for the appropriate contact in your organization, because your servers can put load on those external systems, and you need to, because of regulations, you do need to be able to say have an account so that the server that's being hit can go, hey, what are you doing? Here's what I prefer to. A good example of this is some companies actually do their own indexes of Wikipedia. When they have just pointed to the website itself, normally there's a contact there that come back and say, we actually have a better way to do that rather than the web interface. Work with them, educate them on the ability to actually index that content and have it available, but give them alternatives to the public interface that are both easier for the search index to get some information, get metadata and all the context, and also easier for the content servers themselves to provide that up in a very efficient manner. You know, we did not set a proxy server, but we can actually go through at that farm server. We can actually come in and put an additional configuration down here at the search administration level. We have search alert statuses are on, query logging is on, so we can see what's going on. And right now we don't have a search center URL, so we don't have a central location where all of our users go to do that. This is normally set up when you set up a portal or a top-level enterprise template that would be able to tie that in there. So we know that we need to come in and set that if we're working with that. So that's the simple administration information. Then we go over to the diagnostics itself. The crawl log can tell you what's going on, give you a lot of information. If you notice, as I go through these drill downs as well, we keep our pull down on the left-hand side, so we don't have to, we don't lose our way like we used to have to do with previous versions of SharePoint. So we know where we're going, we know where we're at. Things become a lot easier for you. So we've got the crawl logs. We can actually see the local SharePoint files. We can actually go by host name, by the history. We can look at the breakdowns, the databases, the URL views. So we've got a lot of different information in there that we can actually tweak on those logs. We can get a lot of information coming in, see what the count is on each of the documents. We've got a lot of good basic information that's being processed right off the bat. We can actually go through, and just like we have a server health account, we have a crawl health report that we can go through and see what's going on here. We can actually very quickly see a report on where we're at with our crawls. This is where you can actually come down and take a look. We don't have a lot of activity right here, but you can actually see that we do have some information modified. We've got some errors popping up through here. With a higher loaded server, you'd be able to see a little bit more data here. We've got our context down here, and we're actually seeing very specific information about what's going on the server. Local SharePoint sites is all we're searching right now, or all we're crawling, and we can get that information on a very timely basis. So we've got our summary, we've got our details, we've got all of our information here, total items we crawled, modified, errors that we've got going on there. We're going, oh, we've got errors. We need to go in and take a look and see what's happening through all of it. We can see the latency that's coming through here, so we'll know items that are close by, items that are far away. This is good for making sure that if you're just doing internal like this, you want to see very, very low latency. If you're actually working with systems outside of your organization, then you'll want to pay attention. So you can actually see here that we've got a spike in the repository itself. Maybe there's something going on with the database. We'll know about that. So you can say very, very quick. And then something happened about this time. At this point, I know that it's one of our database jobs kicked up, so when it's going through there pulling that content out, things got a little slow. But if you're actually going through a very heavy processing load, then you can actually go in and say, hey, something's happening, maybe network traffic, maybe a server load, whatever, and you can know what's happening and be very active with all of those. You can know where your crawl freshness is. This is something that's important for a lot of places. Know what's happening here. Freshness is less than a day. This is where you know what's happening over the time period. As you can tell, we're very active here recently, but earlier on, say before we installed this server in the class, we don't have any freshness, so we actually know that there's a lot of problems there because, well, it doesn't have any information. So we can actually see the trends, we can actually know what's going on with that. And we can go through all of these pieces and get a lot of different data on those crawls. And we can be very, very specific about what our loading is on the servers, know that we may need to start looking at another server to the farm or maybe breaking off the system into its own groups. We can actually see exactly what's happening. We can filter on the various servers. If we had more than one server, we would have those options there. The times, lots and lots of data built in. So I'm not going to go through the rest of the content because you can take a look at that yourself, but just know that you probably want to go through all of these reports and make sure that you understand exactly what you've got in the system, what information is available to you, and what you can actually work with. Just like the crawl health reports, we have a query health report where we can go in and see not just what's going on with the data coming in, but what your users are doing. This is one of those pieces that's very valuable. You can actually go through and see what your clients are. We don't have any clients right now because we don't have a lot of searches going on with this, but we can actually go through and see, are the searches coming from mobile devices? Are they coming from desktop applications, Office integration? Are they coming from web browsers? If they're coming from web browsers, what types you're getting in there? So you're getting a lot of information in there about how you're getting that information, what those searches are doing. You can actually do some of the trending, so you can see what you're doing for the pieces there. You've got your crawl rates, you've got your update rates that you can see in there, how quickly the items are coming in. And I'll just go over to the overall. You can get your latency here, so you can very quickly see, again, we don't have any our data there, but you can see if your users are starting to get slow results, if maybe you've got too much going on, if all of those people are if you've got too many people querying too few servers, and be able to manage that information before it gets slow and everything goes through there. Again, just like the crawl health reports, you can go through and get lots of different information. It's all built in for you. And here we are at the usage reports for your search application. This is a very valuable tool for going through and finding out what your users are searching on and what they're actually finding. We're very interested in the server infrastructure and how all the pieces fit together. What your users are interested in is, are their queries being answered? So to begin with, we've got the usage report up on the top, which basically gives you the number of queries that are being performed, what the volume trends are, what's happening, how quickly they're being answered, those kind of things. In a nice simple report in Excel for use for your own reporting up to your management chain, or for doing your own trending analysis so you know exactly what's happening around your organization. But down below that are some more very useful reports that you can use to not just manage the how the server is responding, but how effectively it's responding. You can see we actually have the top queries by day and by month, so we can actually see what users are looking for, what they're trying to figure out, what their trends are for what they're looking for. You can see the abandoned queries, which are very critical for the search, which means that the users searched on something, got a set of results back, but didn't click on them, didn't actually go through those, which means that they generally either didn't find what they needed, or they weren't even encouraged to look at additional filtering on there. So generally things were not that good. You want to see that, you can actually use query rules later on to improve those abandoned queries and let people come into place. Even more interesting is the no result queries. So the users searched on something and the search engine couldn't find anything to get even close. So it couldn't even make a suggestion. Those are probably the worst queries that you want to see. You always want them to see information coming back. Ideally, you want it very on target and very interesting information, but you at least want it to have some information. A no result query leaves your users thinking that, well, where is everything? So being able to go in there and seeing what they're querying on, if nothing else, you can actually put some promoted content in there to help guide them on some better search terms or help them in their search to find information. And at the bottom, you can actually see the query rule usage. We're going to look at query rules in just a minute, but those are basically to help you improve your own query modifications. So when you're getting results, you've actually got different ways to be able to promote information, to be able to put synonyms in, to be able to help your users find it, kind of guide them on common terms. And this lets you see which one of those rules are being effective, which ones are being fired, how that information is coming into place. So this is the reports on the search capabilities is very, very valuable for you for not keeping the server up, but keeping the server relevant and valuable for your end users. So now we've gone through the diagnostics. Let's take a look at actually the mechanisms that are in place. The first thing we're going to look at is your content sources, because all other things aside, your content sources are your search, because if it's not in a content source, you're not going to gather the information. So let's take a look at what we can do on content sources. You can see right here that we're right out of the box. We have our search server application, and we've got just one content source. It's a local SharePoint site. So we can see that it's not being crawled right now and didn't have a duration. Last duration was 2 minutes and 11 seconds. We can actually see it was completed. Next full crawl we're not scheduled for right now. We're scheduled for an incremental crawl in just a little bit, and the priority that's going on there. We can actually go in and edit this and change out some of the pieces. We know that we actually have web interface, and we've got our SharePoint API interface that we can come through the web interface there, so we know what's going on. We can actually put additional addresses in here if we wanted to. If we had multiple SharePoint servers that we wanted to group together, we can actually put all of that in there and have it work as a unit. Crawl everything under the host name, or we can just crawl the site collections of each start address. So we can actually say we've got the root site collection, but as an example, if we've got a home site collection and then we've got a my sites underneath that, crawl everything means we'll gather up all of that together in the same content. Whereas if we wanted those my sites in a different content, we would say just crawl the top level, and then we have another content type that would content source that would come in, pointed at the my sites, and pull in that site collection. We're doing incremental crawls. Continuous crawls are very useful for gathering lots of information and making sure everything's as up to date as possible. This is where you go for maybe applications that have lots of refreshes and things like that. Generally, you want to work with the incremental calls, as you can see, every 20 minutes for the business day, we don't have a full crawl. Sometimes you may want to set those up as well, or create a schedule that maybe every weekend just stop and do a full crawl in case something gets changed or whatever. That's normally what I set things up to. On off periods, just go back and do a full crawl just to make sure everything's in good order. Then we can actually set certain content sources as high priority. As you start getting more and more content sources on the server, you can bog things down. Things may get larger so that the schedules get bumped. Priorities let you make sure that the important items are being crawled in a timely manner. So that's our item there. Let's go through it. We can also go through, and if we're just interested in, we want to see new information, we can view the log here. We don't have the information there. We actually have a crawl going. We actually went in and edited it so you can see the crawl is happening here. If it wasn't going on, we could actually start the full crawl, the incremental, or just resume a crawl. We can also actually pause right now. If we say, this is going to take a while, I need something else to get in front, we can pause it, or we can just abandon that crawl altogether. We can also do that for all crawls here, pause or stop, and then refresh the information so we can make sure and see what we've got. To create a new content source, we would go in and give it a name. For this, I'm just going to do a random site. Actually, for this course, we'll do. Normally, I don't recommend this, but we can actually go through and see. We're going to have it set up as a website. As you can see, it gave me my examples. It lets me know what's going on. I can actually let first page of the address, or I can actually say, got my course here. Let me make sure and go back and give me my address. But I can actually say, I want to go in to a certain number of depth. I want to go into 3 pages, and I want to go to 1 additional server outside of there. So I can be very controlled about where that content goes. So if I wanted to just go right on this server and nowhere else, but I know that some of these links go over to MSDN or may go over to some of the product pages. So I can actually say, let me go to 1 link away on the server hop. If I wanted to go nuts here, it could take forever to get that crawl done, and the server owner might not be happy with me. I'm sure the Bing guys would go, hey, that's our job, not yours. But we can actually go and point those to the different pieces. Again, we've got schedule. The only schedule we have is 20 minutes. We can go through and set a new schedule. Let me go ahead and I just want to do this weekly. Every week, we'll do it on Sunday at 1 a.m. That's a nice, good time to drop in there. And then we don't want to go within that day for the schedule. So we'll go in, and now we've got another incremental crawl. Don't want to do a full crawl. We'll do it first time to get it set up, and then after that, we don't have to worry about it. So this is our very quick piece here. You notice that as we move through, the items change. So the context of the content is important. So we end up dropping out, and we know we're just going to be on the server if we're doing the SharePoint site. We have a file share. We actually have specific information for the crawls. Exchange public folders, fairly common here. And our line of business data, it's just going to tell us, you let me know. I don't have a lot of details. And then we've got customer repositories that we can come in and see. Oh, there we go. The line of business data, our default is through the business data connectivity service, and then we can tie in with that. How we're going to put it in place, it knows how it works. And the customer repository, we don't have any connectors registered, so we're not going to be able to search those as well. But going through here, you can actually set up a lot of details on those content types, crawl all over the place, and have all of the information that you need to do. So I'd mentioned the crawl rules. Here we can actually work with the different crawl rules that we're interested in. Type a URL and click to test to find out if it matches a rule. You can actually check and fire different queries against the rules themselves. We don't have any to test against, so we're going to go through and do a new crawl rule and show you what you can do with these. Again, we get the alert as we go through all of the SharePoint management pages. You'll see that SharePoint alerts you when you're not using a secure connection. The reason why it's doing this is that we may set some credentials, and it's letting us know that if you type this in and you're not in a secure path or it's not on your network, then you need to be worried about that. The path itself, we can set it up and do, again, we'll know what's going on there. We want to exclude complex URLs. Basically, we want to exclude where we have parameters on the query that may change our results depending upon what those parameters are. Since we don't know that what's going on there, we'll just go ahead and pull those out. We can also do specific includes. Basically, follow the links without crawling the URL itself, crawl the complex. So that becomes very interesting when you're getting different parameters. It will try and do all of the parameters that it's got, or if there's a already query set up, you'll get that, and then crawl the SharePoint content as an HTTP page. This means that you'll query SharePoint as the users see it, rather than through the API, which gives you some different information and actually gives you some additional content based upon things such as the access control and all of those kind of things. And then your authentication here, you can do different content account. Again, it's warning you this is going through. Do not allow basic authentication means that if you do allow basic authentication, then your password may go through to that system and may be a man in the middle. Client certificates, you can upload them, form credentials, cookies, or anonymous access. You can actually set those up as well. So you actually get a lot of control over what's going on with that path, and you know which triggers are going to be in there and how you're going to actually control that content coming in. So we're going to cancel that rule out. And next. As you're working with different systems, you may have different DNS settings on different locations. What you can actually do is set up new mappings between the different servers. So if in one of your locations there's a different DNS entry than your users will, so your index, your SharePoint server sees your HR site as but your users themselves just see it as maybe as something like that. You can actually put those mappings in so that as that different crawl location, SharePoint will dynamically translate the address in the index, which is what SharePoint sees the site as, to the appropriate URL for the user when they come in. So you won't get things linked in. This is an invalid. My apologies. And we'll go through. And now you can see that every time that a search result comes back with the SharePoint servers, hr.mycompany.com, what will come out in those links is it'll translate that over into myhr.internal.com. And when your users click on it, it'll go through and everything will be good. This is one of those pieces where it's a small item, but it makes a big difference for your users, because if they're clicking on links that don't work, even though it's just a simple edit, they're going to be very unhappy with their search results. SharePoint can also set up so that it knows how to handle the different file types. You can actually go through and see that there may be issues with various ones. You can actually do blocking for crawling on the various types. But for example, we've got our zip file type that we know about and we're giving the correct icon to. You can actually go through and put additional file types in here for your own content. If, for example, you've got a content of I'll use a .stl file. We can come in and now we've got that into our information, a .stl, and the system will know that yes, this is one of the pieces that we want to look at. We can actually register locations in those, register icons as well, but for most of the information we just want to take a look and see that let our system know that we need that information and we understand the file types. You can actually go through, if you've got a situation where maybe a lot of things are changing, it may take the system a long time to update the index. If you've got a situation where you may have a lot of content that has been moved, maybe you've got a migration or something else happening outside of the SharePoint server, you can actually come through and reset the index server. What this does is it means that when SharePoint crawls that information again, it'll do a full crawl of all of your content sources, and it won't try to rebuild those indexes or try and do its differentiating. It'll just set it all up afresh. So that means that on one side that everything will be down. On the other hand, you're actually looking at being able to do a fresh and complete index on the new content. you don't have to worry about some things being out of sync or the search results coming back intermittent until everything gets through its crawl. You have a good, clean re-index for your entire system. Not used a lot, but when you need it, you really need it. Another simple item, you can actually pause the search service application. It will pause all crawling and indexing. So you can come in and say, I've got to do something. Maybe I'm actually changing some servers out. Maybe I don't want to get in an intermediate state. I can go in and just set it up, pause all of the search applications. As you can see, it comes through and says, I'll go to the services and stop them. And so we've paused our search administration. You can actually see that we've come back to the home page of the administration, and our administrative status is paused for. And it's showing us it's an external request, i.e. I did it. So we can go back in and resume the search application so that we can continue on with the walkthrough. Yes, we'll want to resume. And here you see we've returned to the search administration page where our administrative status is back to running. So pause, resume, goes through the process, and you can manually make sure everything's in the correct order. So now we'll come over to the impact rules. And you can see that we can actually say how we're going to manage the different locations. We're going to add a rule in here that's going to tell us. Again, we're going to use our trusty site. And we're going to be nice to the guys that run the TechNet site and say how many documents we're going to do at a time and not wait. I know they've got some good infrastructure there, so I'm going to crank it up a little bit and say we're going to send them 20 simultaneous results. Or we can be very nice to it. Maybe the site is one of the external places. We know that the site's not very high powered and we don't want to flood it. So we can actually say only do one document at a time. We don't want to do parallel requests to it. And let's actually give them a 5-second pause. We want to just do a slow work with that. We don't care if things are running a little bit slow for doing the crawl. We can say that just every 5 seconds we'll send off a request, we'll work through it, and things will work through fairly well. So we can go through there and set that up and make sure that we're not overloading the site. Yeah, there we go. It's not wanting the HTTP, so we move that out. And now we've got our rule in there, wait 5 seconds, and we've got the order of those in place, so we can actually set some prioritization on there. So now that we've got that in place, bump back. And we've walked through all of the crawling configurations. Going through, now we've got the information coming into our system, it's being crawled and indexed. Now let's take a look at how we can handle what the user needs to see, how they can actually put their queries into place, and how they can actually get the appropriate results back out. Here we can specify authoritative pages. This is actually a section that's very useful, especially for creating top level. We can actually say, here are a hierarchy of pages that have the most information. So if we're internal to organization, we're saying that our SharePoint site is our most authoritative page. But we also want to say that there's some other pages that are very authoritative. Let's say that we have an HR site, just HR. If something's coming in that has a match, that HR has a match for, they've got the top level. Even more important, probably for our CEO, is we've got that in place. So maybe we've got some additional pieces that we want to say that might be useful as well. We still want HR and legal to pop up there, but for our second level, we know that we've got a lot of information that's very important that goes up on legal and HR, but our 401k special site that makes sure that our employees are taking advantage of their 401k and saving for retirement, that's at a second tier level. So if there's nothing on the HR legal, then the results from the 401k will pop in at that next level. So we can go down to a third level, and then we can also say that sites to demote, that we can actually say that what's happening, we've got some stuff that are at that top tier, the second tier, third tier, and we can say that there are some things that maybe they're not that great. We don't really want them in the sites. If it's something, well, use it if it's there. We're not removing it from the search results altogether. But if it pops up here, if anything else is better, use that instead or put those in front. This is basically saying use it if there's nothing else in place, and we'll actually go through and set those systems up. This lets you very fine-tune exactly what your users will be getting back on their results, and you can actually know that they're getting the authoritative pieces. This is very useful for if you've got situations where I'm using some of these examples, but if you've got a situation with their hr.internal.com, if you've got a very heavily used maybe site that your users are looking at different vacation options or trying to talk about what they're doing on their off time, and someone's looking for vacation policies. Often, if it's very popular, if there's a very active thread going on in that informal discussion, that can flood out your official communication. So at here, you'd make sure that your official HR policies would come up, and you would see the vacation policies at the top level of those search results, even though the other items are maybe more visited and more active inside the system. So very useful for making sure that the right information gets to your users. Now here we have our result sources. This is what we used to see as scopes in the old SharePoint. You can see actually right here it's talking about those. Those are no longer used, and when you see the search scopes, you need to take a look at the sources itself. Coming in, you can see that there are a lot that are already defined for you. We actually have our default content source, which is the local SharePoint results, which just gives you basically all of the SharePoint. But then you can actually come in and say pages, items matching a tag, so it's looking at just the tags on those items, documents, conversations, people, all of those kind of pieces, the wiki, so you can go in and change things around. Let's go to take a look at some of the information here. We're going to say that our wiki is, let's say that we're looking at popular stuff. We can actually view what that means here. And you can see that this is something internal. It's a managed source that I don't have permissions for. So it was created at the administrator top level account. So I'd need to change over my account to that search service application. Let's go through and take a look and see what the information is here. You can see the name and the description, so we can actually see what's going on there. Protocol is from there, so we can go local, remote. We actually can work with OpenSearch and Exchange to pull in that information. So SharePoint search result. We can actually see the search terms, the path. Right now we don't have the permissions to go in there, but we can actually show that you can set up a query builder to say exactly what's going on. And in this one, we're actually finding those items that are marked as popular, that SharePoint's saying these are very active tasks and people's results are very happy with these. So we come through and we can actually set those up. We can know what's happening with all of those. And you can actually tweak and let people go and look for different types of information or different categories of the information inside SharePoint results. If you're used to consumer level, say Bing or Google, you can actually equate this to looking for web results or image results or video results or those kind of things. You can actually break that up, and you can see right here there's local video results. So you can actually say, I only want to look for videos that match all of this, and you can further refine your results there. For query rules, remember we were talking about in the usage report seeing which rules were in place. This is where you can actually see what those rules are. We can actually go to any of these sources that we're talking about. We know that local SharePoint results are our default, and we can actually see that we haven't set up any user segments or topic categories. So we can take a look, see what's going on there. Now that we've made those choices, we can actually see what some of the rules are. Tags in SharePoint Search, fill-in results. We can't see that with the event pages. We can do people name searches and do query matches on the different sources there. We can actually come in and say we want to stop or continue these pieces. So new query rule. We can come in and see what we're doing for. I'm going to do the rule of for SharePoint is I'll look for jelly beans. And we're going to say that the keyword we'll go actually to match the keyword exactly. And someone's looking for, and just look for that. We can add a promoted result of, and working on it. So we can actually have a permitted result in here. If you're looking for jelly beans, we want to make sure you're going to our official jelly bean site for the company. So we can go through there, add that permitted result, and just like an advertising link on a commercial search browser, search engine, you can actually come through and put those in place. And we can actually put those promoted results. We can actually add a number of them and set up the order that they're going to show up into the system. You can actually see that if we're doing publishing, we can actually say that we're running a special detail that's only going to happen for today and tomorrow, and and next week we'll do a review on it, and you need to contact the So you can see situations where you may run into this, where maybe HR has open enrollment day, or you actually have your health plans that need to be returned by then. So you can actually put these in place. You can have the promoted information come in. You can actually have the searches in addition to your announcement. You can actually put it inside their searches and let them know what's going on. So lots of capabilities in there to make sure and give your own results very quickly inside the search engine. You can actually see the client types, things coming in from alerts, from content searches, from all kinds of different places that you can know exactly where those pieces are coming in from. You can know what clients are coming in. There's no query throttling at the moment. And if you want to put in a new one, we'll say, and we'll put a throttling of middle. So we can actually say, as these things are creating new results, we can say what's our priority there, and the high priorities get through if we're starting to bog down. If we're getting lots of content searches happening and maybe the RSS feeds are being created, those are being pushed back in fairly quickly. And then we've got our managed properties. You can actually see that the managed properties come in from a variety of locations. People About Me comes in from Exchange and from Active Directory. We've got the account name coming in from Active Directory. All of these are various maps. So you can actually pull in the information there, map them over into something that people actually can understand, and work on those properties. And this is not new for SharePoint 2013, but you're actually having a easier time working through it. And if you're familiar with it, you're in good shape. If you're not familiar with this, with SharePoint, definitely want to go talk with your Active Directory people, whoever is managing it, and how things are coming into play. You can actually see here that you know what's safe and what's not. One of the pieces is author, which is coming from the mail from, which is also coming from the author key on Office documents, and you notice it's marked not as safe because it's not a managed source, and it could be coming in from outside your organization. Users can put information in, so you don't want that information not being filtered or managed. Here are your query suggestion settings. This is the piece that earlier I mentioned, that you can actually have the search kind of looking ahead and offering up options for what your users are searching for. This is a fairly new area and fairly simple to go into. Basically, you want those phrases inside a text file, and when you go import them, it's simply upload. So you go in and look for that text file, you upload it in there, you've got those documents, that those phrases, as they start typing, if it matches, they'll start giving suggestions for their queries, and then you also have suggestions of never to suggest. So if they're typing it in, make sure that even if it matches something on the top piece, we really don't want that out. Maybe it's a subset that really doesn't make sense unless you put in the full amount. So you can go in there and put those queries in. Let your users actually get a little bit more of the experience they're used to in the public search engines. And here we have our basically our store management tool. So we can go in through and you can look at different pieces, the department, the job title, give lots of information for tagging, for navigation, for the usage and sorting and all like that. So you have lots of, this is basically here for you to be able to put in custom taxonomies. and to be able to manage all of the information inside your organization. It's really set up to be able to have your information architects or information managers able to come in and put in new information here. So normally what you're going to be doing is managing those architects inside the system when you come into here. But know that it's here, know that you want to work with it, know that you can actually work with different languages, and this is where you do a lot of your internationalization comes into place for the search engine. This is the spot. And then finally for searches, you can actually come in, if you're a member for authoritative pages, we're able to promote sites or demote sites. There are obviously situations where you really don't want searches to show up in there. We'll go in, at this point you can go in and set those URLs in, and you can actually say, we can go in there, we can remove them immediately, and now you've got, again, we've got not found because it's just one I made up. But any sites that you don't want to have inside your search results, go in here, put them in, pull them out immediately, and now that you know that if any of your links or anything happens that ends up with a search that may have a URL that you don't want in there, it's not going to show up in your site. You can very definitively say that won't show up in my search, and you don't have to have your CEO or COO calling you up going, why is this showing up somewhere? So you've got full control over it. You've got a definitive, I don't want to see this, and away it goes.